The NWA, right now, is terrible. No ifs or buts about it. It's not even just an empty shell of its former glory, it's a shell of an empty shell at this point. Gone are not only the days when the 10 pounds of gold were considered a big deal, but also the days when it was at least relevant enough for boomers to consider learning how to use YouTube.com in order to stay up to date with the show. And yes, I'll address the elephant in the room right now. I know the period between after TNA stopped using the belt and Corgan buying the brand was arguably more desolate than what we're witnessing right now, but no one cares about that. It's like discussing Cornette-era Ring of Honor and everything following that up to before it got shut down by Sinclair. Even if neither of these two periods ranks all that high among the absolute worst things that have ever happened to this fake sport, there was pretty much no point in getting emotionally invested in the long term, unlike the current NWA weekly show that I feel like has the potential of being a lot better than it is, just by tweaking a few things here and there. While for Ring of Honor things are considerably better now on the financial side of things, the pay-per-views we've been getting so far were all pretty much just AEW events without the main event talent, so until we get a proper weekly show, with a proper roster where the belts named after the brand don't feel like inferior versions of their AEW counterparts, I've gotta give the NWA a slight edge for feeling like a full-fledged program and not just a spin-off that happens every once in a while. So yeah, what I'm going to do in this video is go through some of the active wrestlers and various other figures that work for Corgan's NWA and try to see how things can realistically be improved. Realistically as in, I'm not giving Corgan the budget to hire John Cena and The Rock, nor I'm giving him a primetime TV deal on Fox, just to give a couple of examples. Let's start from the top, the world champion, the current owner of the 10 pounds of gold. Tyrus. I won't beat around the bush. He's god-awful. I feel bad for openly supporting the idea that anyone should lose their jobs, even when they're really bad at it, but Corgan, please, give it some consideration. He'll be fine. He works for Fox, okay? And I know that's the point. But your master plan of using his presence on Gutfeld to draw eyes to the product is not working. Until you can at the very minimum prove me you can sell out the GPB studio in Atlanta for your tapings like you used to do when Power first started, or unless you can sell out an arena that holds more than, like, 400 people for a pay-per-view, I don't care what arguments you're making, the show is on a decline. And Tyrus ain't doing nothing to help things. Look, I understand that the idea of having a guy who regularly appears on mainstream news media representing your brand sounds alluring, but boomers know their shit when it comes to wrestling. Don't fall for what the people on Twitter are saying. In the good old days when wrestlers tried at least a bit to make worked punches look realistic, guys like Tyrus were fodder, not main event material. Except for the UK, but every competent wrestler that lives there jumps ship as soon as they get the occasion. So, if we were to get rid of Tyrus, what do we do next? The show needs a champion. Who do we pick? The safest and most boring choice is to find a way to bring Aldis back. I get he's not everyone's cup of tea, and the idea of another Aldis reign doesn't thrill me either, but there's a lot of upsides to this choice. Out of everyone who's held the belt in the last 20 years, he's the one who by far tried his hardest to make it seem like it's a big deal to represent the NWA. That's gotta be worth something, right? He's a solid big man who doesn't look too imposing despite his size and can work heel and babyface if asked. Not great, but good enough to fulfill his role. It doesn't have to last too long either, just come up with an angle where he returns after seeing how shitty things have gotten while he was away. Have him beat Tyrus as quickly as possible, and in the meantime build up another believable opponent who can defeat him down the line. Matt Cardona is another safe candidate, now that he's healed from the injury that unfortunately derailed his push and a lot of the main event stuff in general. I think he's ready for the proper title reign he deserved all along. Just have him beat Tyrus, enough said, and make him resume his routine where he talks about collecting toys for cheap heat. The wildcard option is EC3. The poor man has gone full schizo, but that doesn't mean that you can't steer him in the right direction when he's properly medicated. He's still a pretty good promo, even if the content of his current promos would have someone like Bray Wyatt question the man's grasp on reality, and has a great physique. His wrestling kinda sucks, but it's NWA power we're talking about. You don't watch it for the 20 minutes epics. You can even relive the epic rivalry him and Tyrus had in TNA. Actually, maybe don't do that. Having an NWO-style invasion with his Control Your Narrative buddies might be fun for a while. I don't know how good or bad most of them are. And you best believe I'm not watching some channel named Top 10 Wrestling to find out, but they can't be worse than Tyrus, am I right? Plus, you can use them to overbook his title defenses in order to better hide his mediocrity in the ring. So, now that we have our champions, who are the contenders? Those three can't be champs forever. There needs to be a bunch of people ready to replace them when the time comes, and, to my surprise, the NWA roster has more than a few of them. Colby Corino, Homicide, Caprice Coleman, Dak Draper, Mims, all solid hands that either might be championship material in the future with a few improvements on the booking side, or are at least good for a filler title defense. But I give higher priority to these other three guys. The first one is a no-brainer, Cyan. He's currently the NWA National Champion, but you can eventually have him lose to some of the people I just mentioned and slowly build him towards the main event scene. He's a good wrestler, decent promo, has a neat-looking mask, but more importantly he is the son of Austin Idol, who's got history with the brand and is usually a pretty good manager. Disband Idolmania Sports Management and have the two be on their own, they'll do well. The second option is Pope, who I always felt like could have been champion a lot earlier, replacing Trevor Murdoch's reign and maybe sticking around for a bit longer. Yes, he's old, I know. But everyone in the NWA is old, and out of all the boomers he's easily the one who aged the best. He's got all the tools to be a proper top babyface, which would be a breath of fresh air after the main event scene has been centered around heels for so long. The third option is one that may be a bit controversial, but I pick Bully Ray. Maybe the Impact fanboy in me is being a little biased here, but I watched the Hard to Kill match he had against Josh Alexander this January and the whole feud that preceded it, and I thought he did an excellent job. The booking itself did a lot of the heavy lifting for him, but he played his part really well, and I'd rather see him in charge of the NWA for a few months than whatever they're doing right now in Impact with Tommy Dreamer. So, now that we've taken care of the 10 pounds of gold, what do we do with the mid-card? Truth to be told, I wouldn't change all that much. It's decent, given the resources Corgan has. Outside of Cyan, if we want to transition him to the main event scene, I would not change any of the current mid-card champions for the time being. If it depended on me, though, I would be more consistent on where the storylines for those champions would air, both for the purpose of making Power and USA feel more unique and because a lot of these belts would feel redundant otherwise, being shown all at the same time. The situation with the women is a bit more complicated. But one thing I am adamant about, the women's tag belts need to disappear. The overall roster isn't big enough or good enough to give the women a secondary title that needs two people. If WWE and Impact can't make it work, then the NWA can't make it work. It's a bit of a drastic solution, but it's for the best. I doubt anyone will miss them if they decide to retire them. Now, for the bigger question, should they also retire the women's singles belt? Part of me is of the opinion that the NWA women's division isn't actually all that bad, with people like Natalia Markova and Genocide, to say a couple, and Camille has been a good champion so far. Again, considering what she's working with, but the booking itself for the women is preventing me from getting invested. It's arguably a better division than MLW and AEW, but that's an awfully low bar. I say, keep the singles women's division as is, but occasionally also borrow talent from other companies to keep things fresh and interesting. That should be enough if you wanna keep the booking low effort but effective. Now that we've covered the entire roster and its belts, I'll dedicate this last portion of the video discussing how to improve the presentation and other minor aspects of the show. First order of the day, Fire Velvet Sky. She's bad. Joe Galley and Tim Storm make for a decent commentary duo on their own, but she ruins it. Austin Idol was arguably worse on commentary than her when he was around, but he compensates by occasionally giving relevant insights on the match when people he's working with are wrestling. Plus, as I already said, he's a good manager, so he doesn't need to do commentary. Velvet Sky is just plain boring wherever you put her. I used to think that Mae Valentine was out of place as a backstage interviewer when they first gave her the role, but now I wish they used her even during the tapings. I don't hate Kyle Davis, and I don't think she's always the best choice for an interview, but sometimes you need someone who bites back. Interviewers don't always have to be punching bags, right? It's a small nitpick, and likely something only I care about, but since they're working with such a small crowd for their tapings, why not buy some bleachers and put everyone there in front of the hardcam so it doesn't look as empty? It's not much, but I think it would help with the presentation. I'll conclude with a bit of a hot take. I don't think wrestlers should ever have entrance music. They don't have one for the tapings, and I think they should not have one for pay-per-views either. I just really like the premise of the wrestlers coming out of a big curtain and all you hear is the announcer calling their name and the crowd cheering. It's very unique in a world where even the smallest of indies have entrance music. And that's it. I think I've mentioned everything that could be mentioned. So, what do you think? Are my ideas bad? Are you breathing a sigh of relief, knowing that I will never own a wrestling company? Make sure to let me know in the comments. Until then, I'll be away, in the distance, pretending to work on a video game.